Have you ever thought about how some of the greatest success stories in history are actually born from complete and utter failure? Well, today we're going to dive into one of the biggest of them all, the legend of Sir Ernest Shackleton, whose disastrous Antarctic expedition turned into one of the most powerful lessons in leadership ever recorded. To really get a handle on the legend of this guy, you just have to listen to what his contemporaries said about him. This quote, it's not just some nice compliment. It basically frames him as the patron saint of lost causes. It tells you everything you need to know about the kind of leader he was when things looked absolutely hopeless. Okay, so our story really kicks off with this number, 28. That's how many men, Shackleton included, were about to be swallowed whole by the most brutal, unforgiving environment on the entire planet. Now, for 497 days, just think about that. That's almost a year and a half. These guys were just gone, completely cut off from humanity, adrift on a massive, cracking sheet of ice after their ship was literally eaten by the frozen sea. And what about their chances of being rescued? Yeah, that would be a big fat zero. Absolutely none. There was no radio. They were thousands of miles from anyone or anything. No one was coming for them. If they were going to survive, it was going to be entirely up to them. To really grasp just how hopeless this whole situation was, you kind of have to put yourself there. It's 1915. You're in the Weddell Sea. The plan was incredibly ambitious, to be the first to ever cross the entire Antarctic continent on foot. But, well, Antarctica had other plans.
And then, on November 21st, 1915, the unthinkable happens. The Endurance, their ship, their home, their only connection to the world, is just crushed by the immense pressure of the ice, and it sinks. In that one moment, the grand mission was over. It was replaced by a single, brutal new goal: get all 28 men out of there alive.
So you have to ask, right? What kind of person, what kind of leader could possibly get a crew through that? Well, to understand Shackleton's unique genius for survival, you've got to look at his past. And the irony is just incredible. His strength wasn't built on success. It was forged by a lifetime of failure. There's no better way to understand Shackleton than to put him side by side with his great rival, Robert Falcon Scott. Scott was the ultimate establishment guy, a by-the-book product of the British Navy. Shackleton, on the other hand, was an Anglo-Irish outsider, a total pragmatist who earned respect instead of just demanding it. And their rivalry got personal on their very first expedition together, when Scott sent a sick Shackleton home in disgrace. That humiliation would fuel him for the rest of his life. Look at his resume before the Endurance. It's just this long list of near misses and straight-up failures. He failed in politics, he failed in business. But look closely at that 1909 moment. That one's key. He was just 97 miles from being the first person to reach the South Pole, and he turned back. Why? To save his men. That single decision tells you everything about the leader he was becoming. Every failure was just another lesson in how to be resilient. Okay, so let's get back to the ice. The year is 1916. The ship's at the bottom of the ocean. 28 men are totally stranded on a floating piece of ice. Their impossible escape is about to get underway. So their entire survival story, this epic ordeal, can really be broken down into these 5 distinct, absolutely insane stages. From setting up camp on the ice, to this terrifying journey in open lifeboats, to finally reaching solid ground on the desolate Elephant Island. But even then, they were still totally stranded and would surely die without America. And that brings them to this Hail Mary pass, the most audacious gamble of the whole thing. Shackleton knew, he just knew, their only shot was for a small team to try and sail for help. And the target? A tiny whaling station on South Georgia Island, a staggering 800 miles away across the open ocean. And get this, they had to do it in the James Caird, which was basically a glorified rowboat. A tiny, 22.5-foot open boat. For 16 days they battled hurricane-force winds and waves the size of buildings in what is still considered one of the greatest feats of navigation and seamanship in human history. It's just unbelievable. So yeah, spoiler alert, they survived. But how? Really, how did they pull this off? This is the part that turns this survival story into a masterclass in leadership. It's why they literally study him at places like Harvard Business School today. It wasn't just what he did, it was how he led. So let's break down his playbook. These were the core pillars of what made him the boss, as his men called him. He was flexible. The second the ship was gone, the mission changed from exploration to survival. He leveled the social structure, making officers and sailors share the exact same miserable chores.
And maybe most importantly, he was a master psychologist, constantly managing the crew's mental state to keep despair from setting in.
And if you need just one story to sum it all up, think about this. Shackleton tells his men they have to ditch everything, every personal item except for 2 pounds of gear. But then he makes this one totally bizarre exception. He saves the meteorologist's banjo. He knew that music and routine weren't luxuries. He called them vital mental medicine, every bit as essential as food and water.
But here's the thing. Shackleton's story, his incredible achievement, it doesn't just end with the rescue. To really understand the full scale of what he pulled off, you have to hear about the other half of his expedition, the guys on the other side of the continent, and their tragic story.
So while Shackleton and his crew were fighting for their lives in the Weddell Sea, there was another team on the complete opposite side of Antarctica, the Ross Sea Party. Their job was critical. They had to lay down supply depots for the crossing party, a party that, of course, they had no idea was never going to show up. And in a cruel twist, their ship was also blown out to sea, stranding them too. They heroically completed their mission anyway, but it came at a terrible price. 3 men died, and all their sacrifice was for nothing.
And that tragedy, that terrible loss of life, it just makes this next number all the more staggering. The number of men lost from the Endurance crew, the 28 guys directly under Shackleton's command, 0. Not a single one. In the face of absolute catastrophe, he brought every last man home.
And you'd think the story ends there, right? Nope. There is one last, absolutely incredible chapter. Fast forward to 2022. The wreck of the Endurance? It was found, nearly 10,000 feet down at the bottom of the Weddell Sea. And it was described as beautifully preserved, a ghost ship in the abyss. The best part? Its location was just 4 miles from the final coordinates logged by the navigator Frank Worsley over a century ago. A final, stunning testament to his genius.
So in the end, Shackleton's big mission was, by all accounts, a complete and total failure. He never crossed the continent. But that failure became his legend. It became this immortal lesson in leadership, which really leaves all of us with a question, right? When your own crisis hits, and it will, which lesson from the boss are you going to use? Will it be flexibility, empathy, or maybe just the simple wisdom of knowing when it's time to save the band?